All right, hi everyone. My name is Ryan Boyd. I'm a developer advocate at Google working on Google Apps and the Apps Marketplace. How many of you attended the last session? Okay. The last session that I did just a few minutes ago. So there may be a slight bit of overlap at the beginning here, but then we're going to be diving into an application. So we're going to give you an overview of Google Apps and the Apps Marketplace. And then we're going to dive into this application that I built called Sassy Voice. Sassy Voice is an online voicemail application for a small business. And we're going to be talking about how you build, integrate, test, and sell that application on the Google Apps Marketplace. So first of all, and this is kind of the repetitive material, bear with me, but Google Apps is about messaging and collaboration. It's about tools like Gmail, Calendar, Docs, etc. that allow organizations to efficiently message and collaborate with each other with minimal IT costs. We have 30 million active users on Google Apps with 3 million businesses. There are more than 3,000 new businesses signing up every day, and these businesses are of all different types and sizes. We have the small mom and pop shops, small retail stores, etc., all the way up through major enterprises and educational institutions. These organizations don't just want the messaging and collaboration tools that we offer them in the cloud. They want other different types of applications in the cloud. They want things like a CRM or a project management application, and they want that to be accessible wherever they are, whether it be from their mobile device or from the web browser. And in order to do that, we've launched the Apps Marketplace. We launched the Apps Marketplace back in March. And basically, it's a place for you guys to build applications and launch them to customers of Google Apps, where they can discover, purchase, and install these applications, which are well integrated with their data that they store in Google Apps. So this is what the Apps Marketplace looks like. It's at google.com/appsmarketplace. Since we're in an environment that most of you probably speak Portuguese as your first language, I will say the Apps Marketplace right now is English only, but we do have applications which are written in foreign languages and on the marketplace. There's a number of Japanese apps as an example, and we definitely plan on internationalizing at some point. So. The Apps Marketplace has over 200 cloud applications on it, and it's definitely growing. We show some logos here. These are people who initially launched with us back in March. There were 50 applications which launched with us, so we've grown significantly since then. And there are applications of all different types. There's expense reporting applications, there's image editors, there's mailing and marketing applications, all sorts of types of apps. So the steps to sell your application to Google Apps customers. One, you build your application. You can build your application using any tools and hosting providers you want. You wouldn't believe the number of phone calls I've been on where a potential partner says, but our app isn't written on an app engine. I don't care. You can have your application on EC2 and launch it on the Apps Marketplace. Of course, we'd love App Engine to be a great environment for you to build your application on, but we understand you may be invested in other technologies. Sign, you integrate your application. After you build it, you want to integrate it with Google Apps. The first and only required method of integration right now is adding single sign-on via OpenID, and we'll see what that experience is here shortly. And you can also go to my next talk in this same room where I talk a little bit more about OpenID and OAuth and the different use cases. The second thing that you'd want to integrate with is some of the over dozen different data integration points. You don't want to have users have data silos. They want to reuse their Google Calendar data, they want to reuse their contacts, and all within your applications. So it makes it a lot easier for them if you integrate with these APIs. And then there are some gadgets that we'll talk about as well. After you build and integrate your application, you can sell your application, go wherever Google Apps goes, and there is a one-time fee of $100 to create your listing, and then there's a 20% revenue share when our billing APIs are available in a country where you are located. So right now there's a revenue share exemption. You can bill your customers however you want, using your own like credit card merchant provider. or what have you, and you can do that directly. So you can launch paid applications in the marketplace, and then eventually when our billing APIs are available, and I'll show a demo of that later, you'll be required to integrate with them, and that's when the rev share will take place. So Sassy Voice. Like I said, Sassy Voice is an online voicemail application for small and medium-sized businesses. It's not an application which I've launched and tried to make money on, but it is a functional application which we've written. And here's what the app looks like. So I'm logged in here. I'm seeing, here's my phone number and my extension, and here's one of the voicemails that I've received. The target customer of Sassy Voice is something like Smart Law Firm. Smart Law Firm is a fictitious small law firm that has a number of different employees, but they don't have an IT staff. They don't want to have to maintain an IT staff, and they want to have all their services in the cloud. So we're going to be using both Sassy Voice and Smart Law Firm in these examples. So first I want to talk about the features of Sassy Voice before it was integrated with Google Apps. So it had an online sign-up. As a small business, you could go to Sassy Voice and you could create a new account. Once your business created an account by providing an email address and a password, you paid for the application with a credit card, and then you would assign all the different extensions within your company. You would input the names and extension numbers for each person within the company so that they could receive voicemail. Every user within the company would then receive an email that looks something like this. You're all very familiar with it. It basically says, hey, your administrator has created an account for you. Click on this link and set a password. The user would then set a password, and then they'd be able to see their voicemail. Fairly simple, but much more difficult than it actually needs to be. So we're going to talk about how we make that easier for both the users and the administrators by integrating Sassy Voice with Google Apps. So there are many different types of integration points, but like I said, the first and required integration point for the apps marketplace is OpenID. OpenID is used to create a single sign-on experience. This single sign-on experience all starts from the universal navigation menu that's at the top of Google Apps. You may notice in Google Apps at the top of Gmail and Calendar, you have this navigation menu that says, Mail, Calendar, Documents, Sites, and then there's a More menu. We want your users to be able to access all their cloud applications from one place. So when they click on Sassy Voice in this menu, they're immediately signed into the application. There's no need for the user to grant authorization to pass their identity to the app, as you typically see with OpenID, because the domain administrator has already granted that on their behalf. In addition to the users having one central place to access their applications in this menu, the administrators also have one central place to access all their cloud applications from the Google Apps control panel and configure them, enable data access, and that sort of thing. So there are many different integration points that you can use for a marketplace application. This is some of them. The most popular sort of integration points are things like calendar and contacts, but document list is becoming increasingly popular as well amongst the apps marketplace applications. So let me show you what the Sassy Voice application looks like to install and start using by a single sign-on. So here is what we call the listing page in the apps marketplace for Sassy Voice. At the bottom here, you have recent customer reviews. Unfortunately, I've not published this listing yet. I don't have any great reviews, but if I did, I'm sure I'd get a lot of customers. And then at the top right is our call to action. We want administrators to add the application. So when they hit that add button, it asks them to input their domain name. So I've inputted smartlawfirm.com here. Hopefully that makes it a little easier to see. And then I can hit go. And okay, internet is working. That's great. I had some little problems before. All right, so I've logged in to the application, and then I go through this install process. This install process is a very simple install process that's similar for all applications in the marketplace. The first thing it asks me to do is agree to the terms of service. I have a very simple terms of service for this sample application. It says you agree that you will love this application. I'm sure my lawyer would not be very happy with that terms of service, but it'll work for today. I agree, I continue, and then we see a list of data access that the application is requesting. So when an application is created, it creates a manifest file. We'll show that here during the presentation. And that manifest file describes a list of resources that that application needs access to. In this case, the application needs access to the list of users on my domain. It needs access to my Google Docs and my Google Contacts. And when I say my, I mean my company's. It's basically access to those resources for the entire company. So I'm really comfortable with this application. I built it myself. If you did not build the application yourself, you want to do a little due diligence and make sure you trust the application vendor. But then you grant data access. And then the next step is an optional step during the install flow where you can configure the application. So I'm going to hit configure application here. And this is going to actually jump over to the Sassy Voice website and go through a new customer form. It already knows my email address, but it needs a little bit more information. Because this application is currently doing billing in the application itself, it's not using Google for billing, it also asks for my credit card number. So I'm going to say my company name here is Smart Law Firm, a little autocomplete action helps. And I have my credit card number. That is a fake test account. Please don't write it down and try to use it. It won't work. And then I am prompted to set up voicemail for my company. Here you see the first integration. So it knows who I am, but not only does it know who I am, it knows who the other people are in the company. If you were to set up this application, Sassy Voice, and you didn't have Google Apps, or the application wasn't integrated with Google Apps, you would literally have to type in the username, first name, and last name for every single user in the company. Well, it makes this application, by integrating with Google Apps and the Apps Marketplace, makes it a lot easier. It just lists out each of the users in the app, and I can scroll down and hit the Setup Voicemail button, and it says, congrats, you've set up your voicemail. Please click the button below to continue the installation. I hit that. Now, I have a choice right now. I can enable the app now or enable it later. By enabling it, every user within the organization gets the navigation menu for Sassy Voice. So I'll show you what that looks like. The application is now enabled. This is where I would go in the control panel in the future to configure settings for it. But for now, I'm going to click the inbox. And I'm going to show you my More menu here. And we can see Sassy Voice is listed here. When I click Sassy Voice, I'm immediately logged into the application and have access to my voicemail. So it's as if the application was part of the Google Apps suite. It has a lot of the same capabilities. I don't have the microphone hooked up, but this is a voicemail from a guy named Litigious Larry. Larry likes to sue a lot of hospitals, and he was calling to check up on the status of his most recent case. But when Litigious Larry called me, typically for most voicemail systems, you might have caller ID. You might know their phone number and you might know their name. But this actually looks up in Google Contacts and gets a lot more information. And we're going to be talking about that in the next part of the presentation here. So let me jump back to the presentation and show you how we did the single sign-on. First of all, single sign-on and OpenID has a lot of terminology associated with it. You can see some of the terms there. We'll be talking in a little bit more detail about that in the next talk, but it sounds really complicated. It's not hard in practice because a lot of people have done the hard work for you. They've created libraries that do all of this. Now, Google Apps OpenID has a slight different discovery process than regular OpenID, but there's also libraries to handle that for you. In today's examples, we're going to actually be using PHP, not necessarily everyone's favorite language, but a language a lot of people understand. So here's some code about how I'm doing the single sign-on via OpenID. In order to do the single sign-on via OpenID, I first need an OpenID consumer object, and it goes through here and creates that consumer object. You'll notice the first line uses memcached, in order to create a store. This is basically the OpenID relying party, and speaking of this terminology, but you can copy and paste this code and it'll work. But the OpenID relying party, which is the Sassy voice application, actually needs to store associations with the server. So those are stored there. You don't need to know all the details, but copy and paste this, it'll work. And then you make the request. So when making the request, you can see at the top it says we got the OpenID consumer from the last method that we just demonstrated, and then we go begin, and we're passing the domain name. The way Google Apps OpenID works is you need to know the domain name of your user to log them in. From that universal navigation menu, when you clicked on Sassy Voice there, Google actually automatically passes the domain name to the application for that application to use it for this process. But if you're having the user log on from your own website, you'll have to ask them for their email address or their domain name. Then the middle part here builds up what's called an attribute exchange request. Attribute exchange is an extension to OpenID, and it provides things like the email address of the user and the first name or last name, language, and some other things for the application. And then basically you're forming up the request, you're sending it over to Google, and once you get back a response, you need to parse that response. So here's a little code for doing that using the PHP OpenID library. Basically, it's getting out the user information, the email address, the first name, and then it's looking up in the database for that user. And that's like the typical process. In the database, you would store the OpenID for a user, and you'd be able to fetch the record for that user based off the OpenID, and then create a native session within your application. So you saw some of the data access, and you saw how we created that universal navigation link. This is the application manifest, which is used to configure those items. And you can see at the top here, you have a link setup. That is the URL that my application went to during the very beginning of installing the application that allowed me to configure the extensions for my users. Then there's the navigation link and an OpenID realm. So, like I mentioned before, OpenID provides certain information about the user. It's generally the claimed ID. This is a URL that represents, or a URI that represents the user. You can store that in your database, and that's what you use to match when you're logging a user in. But there's also that additional information that you can get. You want to be sure that you're talking just with the Google Apps OpenID providers if you're going to trust the email address, the first name and the last name. If you're definitely talking to the Google Apps OpenID provider, then the email address is what's provided by the domain administrator, and the first name and last name are the same. So when we fetched users on the domain, so we saw the list of all the different users that we could assign voicemail boxes to. We did that based off of OAuth access to the data on the domain. It's called two-legged OAuth in this case, but basically what happens here, as a developer, you configure this manifest and you say your application needs access to this information for this reason, and that's what gets displayed in the installation process. So in order to fetch users on the domain, previously you saw with OpenID, we created an OpenID client. In this case, we're going to create an OAuth client, which is basically an object. We use Zen framework for the PHP Google Data APIs library, and so I use the Zen OAuth classes and like the Zen HTTP client here. But basically what it does is configure a consumer key and a consumer secret, which Google gives you as a developer when you register your application, and then it builds up a object, an HTTP client, that whenever you send requests using that client, it automatically adds the appropriate OAuth signatures. So the OAuth part isn't what we're really here to talk about. What we're here to talk about is the provisioning API and how you get the users on the domain. As you can see, it's a fairly simple process. Basically, you pass that OAuth client, you create a few objects, you retrieve a feed from Google that is authorized by OAuth, and that has a list of all the users in the domain. You can then build up an array of those list of users and pass that over to whatever's rendering your web page, if that's how you're using them. So we're going to go back to the demo here and show the next little bit of functionality. I actually already started talking about some of this, in particular how the contacts APIs are used. So when I receive a phone call or receive a voicemail, this system actually looks up in the user's Google Contacts who this voicemail is from. In this case, it knows a number of different phone numbers for litigious Larry, so if he calls from any of them, the system can look it up, and it knows that it's from litigious Larry. And then we have all sorts of other information. We have other phone numbers we can call him back on. We have an email address we can use to return his email, all because we integrated with the user's Google Contacts. And I haven't mentioned this thus far, but this application uses what's called Twilio as an API for voice applications, and I definitely encourage you all to check it out. It's a really great API that's very easy to use. Anyway, so now I've looked up the information about the user, made it a lot easier for the employees in my company to know who they're receiving voicemails from and contact them back. I also have a call log. So the administrators within this application can get a call log, a log of all the different voicemails that were left in the organization. Very handy for auditing purposes, but not so handy if you just have a list of them in a web browser. It's much more handy to have a link like this that says export to Google Docs. I'm going to click on that, and you can see a new tab was opened. And in a second here, we will have a Google Doc representing that call log. And the Google Doc is as a spreadsheet. Now, why might this be powerful? It's powerful because users are familiar with certain tools. A lot of business users are familiar with spreadsheets, and they're familiar with analyzing data in spreadsheets. So what I'm going to do here is build a quick formula here to see how many voicemails my users are getting. So I'm going to say, get me the unique values of column C, and then I'm going to count sorry. I'm going to count for each of these unique values or unique users how many voicemails they've received. I'm going to drag this down here, call this voicemails, and then insert a chart. So now we're going to show you how you would do that, how you would fetch the user's Google Contacts and how you'd export the docs. It's very similar on the authorization side to what we saw earlier, so we don't repeat that. But in this case, you're adding one additional parameter here, the XOAuth requester ID. The XOAuth requester ID represents the user on behalf of whom you're making requests. So if you have a user John logged in, the XOAuth requester ID should be John, because the requests that you're making are going to act with the privileges of John. And what it's going to do is say, I want to retrieve John's contacts feed. So we're building up a URL, which is just the kind of the generic query URL. We're not passing any parameters, but we're building up a generic contacts URL and say, retrieve the feed of John's contacts. And then we loop through the contacts and add them to an array. And after we have the contacts in an array with all the phone numbers and all, it's fairly easy to look it up and figure out who this user is, who the caller is. For exporting a spreadsheet, there are a couple different ways to do this, but the easiest way to export a spreadsheet is to create a CSV file. That's what write call log does, and you're all probably familiar with creating CSV files. It's very simple. So write call log creates a CSV file, then forms up a URL, again having that XOAuth requester ID, identifying the email address of the currently logged in user, and uploads that file. It's one simple line to upload that file. You're passing the MIME type as a CSV, so Google Docs knows to create it as a spreadsheet. And then you're getting the URL back from Google Docs, and that's what was displayed in the web browser. So the web browser opened up that new URL with the Google spreadsheet. Fairly simple. So we had about 100 lines of code. I did count them, but it was quite manual because I counted them from the slides, but hopefully that 100 number is right. In 100 lines of code, we added single sign-on via OpenID. We had a very quick setup process using OpenID Attribute Exchange and the Provisioning API, and we integrated the user's data with the Contacts API and Google Docs. So let me show you one other feature that I've built in this application. And you may have actually seen this earlier when I was logged in, but I actually have a gadget as part of this application. So that when I'm actually checking my email on a regular basis, I unfortunately spend the majority of my day in email. I'm sure a lot of you do as well. I want to see all my different voicemails. I don't want to just come at it in as an email, but I wanted to know what my task list, what voicemails I have to listen to. I want to be able to easily call one of my contacts from the Contacts API, and I can do that all with this gadget. Now, gadgets like this aren't actually installable as part of marketplace applications, but they can access the same OpenID services, and you can provide as a developer some instructions to the user on how to install the gadget. It's a fairly simple process, but in the future we plan on having more installable services. So the future. You're probably wondering, the marketplace has been around for a little bit now. What's happening? The number one thing our engineering team has been working on are the billing APIs. The idea behind the billing APIs is, in addition for domain administrators to have one central place to manage their data access for the cloud applications, for users to have one place that they can log into all their applications and have all this integrated experience, you also want to have administrators be able to manage the payment for all their applications in one place. Now, I'm talking about this slightly prematurely. We're planning on launching it for US vendors soon. International availability will be sometime next year. We're going to be rolling out on a country-by-country basis. Believe it or not, billing is very difficult for legal and tax reasons and all that stuff. And like I said before, until we have the billing API available for your country, you can feel free still to launch applications in the marketplace, collect money from customers using your existing payment collecting methods, and those will be revenue share exempt. Let me give you a demo, though, of what the billing APIs will look like once they're available. And this is a YouTube video, so hopefully this will play well. All right, so you can see it's the same sort of start of the installation process. I'm logging into Sassy Voice here. Sassy Voice is displaying a couple different billing plans. I'm going to choose the $8 per user per month plan for a toll-free number. I'm going to say I have 3 users in my organization that need voicemail, and then I get an invoice. And at the bottom here, because my credit card is already stored because I've added other applications, I can just agree and pay. My order is going to be processed using that credit card. And I must have been recording this on a very slow connection. All right. And then I can enable the application right as soon as I've agreed to billing. Then Google will handle the monthly recurring billing for the application. And then I can actually select individual users to give voicemail. And those users are the ones that will receive those navigation elements. In the universal navigation, those are the ones that will be able to access the application, and those are the users I'm paying for. So basically streamlines that flow a lot more. So I've gone through the whole process. I've talked to you about how you build an application, how you integrate with OpenID, how you integrate with various sets of data, all to launch your application and make it available for the 3 million businesses that are using Google Apps to go out and purchase. Now here's some resources. There's a lot here, but if there's any ones that you want to scramble down quickly, you're welcome to. And I also have my Twitter profile at the end there if you want to contact me. But I definitely encourage you all to check this out. If you have any great application ideas for business-to-business web applications, the Apps Marketplace is a great way to distribute them. Right now, there's another talk going on the Chrome Web Store. uses a lot of the same technologies if you're trying to distribute applications to consumer, so you can reuse a lot of the knowledge that you've gained via OpenID, etc., if you want to write an application and distribute it both to businesses and consumers. So I'm available up here for any questions. I think I have another session starting here shortly, going in through OpenID and OAuth. But until then, feel free to come up and ask me questions, and then I'll be available obviously at the end of the day as well. Thank you very much.